Makasaysayanong adlaw everyone. Welcome to the Kabilin Center's Saysay Sugbo podcast, and we are bringing you another Makasaysayanong episode today. Before we begin, let me tell you about the Kabilin Center, the organization that has brought you this podcast. The Kabilin Center, or TKC, is a heritage center that caters to telling the story of the Cebuano through its various projects and exhibits. For this historical month of June, we shall be looking at the open seas for our talk today. And on today's episode, we will be looking at our maritime culture and heritage as we celebrate the sea and as well as our independence. So, we will be looking back at our naval and trading history, which played a crucial role in telling the story of the seafaring Cebuanos. As an archipelago, the Philippines is no stranger to seafarers and maritime cultures. Filipinos have engaged in maritime trade and naval warfare since the time immemorial. As a matter of fact, the term barangay comes from the balangay, a wooden ship used mostly for trading by native Filipinos during the pre-colonial era. But at times, they could also be used for warfare. So just imagine that the name we give to our local community traces its roots to an object essential for maritime activities. If that is not mind-blowing, then I do not know what is. In this month's Saysay Sugbo podcast, we shall answer these questions by discussing about the maritime history and culture of the Cebuanos from the pre-colonial era to the Second World War. And we shall also know the significance of our maritime past and how it continues to define us as a nation to this day. I am Miss Sisa, and I will be your Makasaysayanong host today. With me here is our guest, Sir Trizer Mansueto. He is a research affiliate of the Cebuano Studies Center. An author of several books, he also contributes stories to Cebu Daily News and the Philippine Daily Inquirer. He was also the author of the History of Danao City of the Cebu Provincial History Project. And I would also like to acknowledge our reactor for this session, Ms. Masi Bacalso Cabañas. She is the Information Officer of the National Museum of Central Visayas. Welcome to our guest speaker and to our reactor. I hope you are having a lovely day today. Now, just a few guidelines before we begin. To keep the talk clear and smooth, profane and unnecessary remarks are highly discouraged in this podcast session. And just a disclaimer, any statements and viewpoints made by the speaker, reactors, and host are for general information and for the purpose of this podcast only. Any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. So, without further ado, let me begin the conversation by asking Sir Trizer a question. Sir Trizer, Cebu, like most of the Philippines, had a long history of maritime activities since the days prior to Spanish colonization. In fact, native Cebuanos originated from a group of Austronesians who partook in sea migrations from mainland Asia around 3000 to 1500 BCE. Did our ancient Austronesian heritage influence our maritime way of life since then?
Okay. Thank you, Miss Isa, for the question. Okay, definitely no. We were highly influenced by the Austronesians. Without the technology that were developed by the Austronesians, we would not have been able to explore the islands of the Philippines. And then, of course, from the Philippines, ang katong mga Austronesians na-explore pa man gito sila explore further in Southeast Asia. Kunya, from Southeast Asia, ni-spread pa gid towards Polynesia, Micronesia, Nya dayon in fact ang mga Austronesians ni spread pa man gid siya as far as Easter Islands, which is of course close to Chile, and then of course as far as Madagascar. So definitely grabe kayo ang influence sa kaning grabe kayo influence sa mga Austronesians nato. And this was brought about by the katong ilang na imbento ang unsa man ang kaning plank nga boat or kaning this is also called as dugout dugout plank boat with kanang outriggers. So tungod ani we were able to explore many islands, not only in the Philippines but also in Southeast Asia and further pa gyud, gawas pa gyud sa Southeast Asia.
All right, sir. So, would Miss Masi like to say anything about that?
Yes, si Sir Trizer, I think I've met you in San Remigio, man siguro. I think you visited
Mm,
our site once.
mm,
Oh, while you're talking about it lang sa sir ba, it just reminded me of like how we were analyzing bitaw what we were digging. So murag,
mm,
I think nakarelate sa kugamay because when we excavated like mga pottery sherds nga naay mga designs kanang matrace sad bitaw nimo siya ang uban designs to other neighboring islands. So makaingon sad ko nga because of that great maritime at ang ilahang paagi sa una sa pag-travel, makaingon ta nga these mga artifacts, the influences sa mga designs sa mga potteries naabot sa Pilipinas because of that very rich maritime history. And the thing is kanang because ang katumangong nakautan namo sa San Remigio, those that we excavated from San Remigio Manggod, their Iron Age. So
mm.
there are, I think, a few resources that would explain about the Iron Age in Cebu as of now. As I'm not sure if there are a lot, no, but as far as I know, I can only say about sa katong mga other references about the potteries nga mga evidences. So kanang sir, are there mga can we naaba tay paagi nga ma-analyze nato say for example the Iron Age through the evidences nga gihatag sa maritime history sa maritime history nato in terms of analyzing our archaeological excavations, archaeological finds, especially those that we found in San Remigio.
Okay, I think there is a possibility no nga pwede na nato siyang ma-analyze pero that would actually depend on archaeologists no kaming naa sa kaming naa sa history di gid mi maka-analyze ana niya, but perhaps na naman tayo daghang mga experts no from the National Museum of the Philippines, daghan na siguro ana nila no nga naagid siguro nagtuon ana nila no nga nag-specialize anang mga butanga no niya. I think I just like to add no nga grabe kay ni ang influence sa kaning Austronesians nato. In fact no wala lang ta nahibaw no nga ang kaning mga Austronesians tungod sa mga Austronesians no ang kaning pagkaon bitaw nato for instance kining tubers kaning yams no na naabot ni o bisan asang dapita sa kalibutan tungod kay gidala ni siya sa mga Austronesians. Even in fact no ang kaning manok o kaning iro no ang mga Austronesians man are thought to have kanang kuan brought these animals no from the Philippines to Southeast Asia and then to other parts of kanang the world no nga which were colonized by the Austronesians.
Ah, that's very interesting, sir. No? So let's move on to the next question. During the early 11th to 13th century, many polities in pre-colonial Philippines began trading with other foreign countries such as those in China, Siam or Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. As a result, most of the polities became thalassocracies or maritime nations. Coastal settlements like Cebu became bustling trading ports. How did pre-colonial naval activities contribute to the development of new centers of trade in the Philippines, and what kind of boats were used by the Cebuanos for their trading?
Okay, thank you. So basically tungod sa technology nga gi-introduce nato sa mga Austronesians no unya dayon later on enriched no by other cultures no like India, like China no mas na-develop pag yun nato ang atong maritime ang atong maritime culture no. So ang nahitabuan na because of that no we gained confidence no the Austronesians or later on the Filipinos for instance no or the Indonesians, we gained kanang confidence no to explore further no katong mga islands nga walay mga tao sa unang panahon, no, giadto na, no, sa atong mga ancestors, unya gipuy-an na nila ang katong mga lugar. However, no, nga nanay mga inhabitants, especially kani bitang mga negritos, mga aitas, no, later on, because of the Austronesians, kani sila nanguan na sila ng laya sila sa ilang mga gipangpuy-an, no, ni adto sila mga bukid-bukid, no. This can be seen, no, sa kaning unsay nahitabo sa Negros, no, because ang katong kani bitang island of Negros, it used to be nga ang kaning mga aitas dere diha sa Negros, no, before during the Spanish era, naa sila nagpuyo sa mga lowlands. But when the Austronesians came, no, according to archaeologists, ni iskapo sila, ni puyo sila ngadto sa mga bukid-bukid, far away from kanang mga recent arrivals. So because of that, no, we gained confidence gyud, no, nga mo explore sa ubang mga dapit, unya naghimo tag mga communities. So tungod ni siya sa atong kanang Austronesian nga influence.
That's I would like to learn more about this sometime, no, because so that means the Aitas used to be in the lowlands, but when the Austronesians arrived, they decided to move to the mountainous faraway areas. Miss Masi, what would you like to say to that? Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Kung lang, while you're talking about it ba, ning lupad lang akong huna-huna, and I don't know if this is a very relevant question kay murag basta nilupad lang akong huna-huna, no. Kanang makapangutana lang sad ko, sir, ba. Ang kini bitong awareness nato sa maritime history nato, is it very relevant in resolving our geopolitical concerns? Nisagap lang siya sa akong huna-huna while you were talking about it a while ago ba?
Depende gina siya, no, kung unsay approach sa atong gobyerno ana, no, ug unsa koy approach pod sa gobyerno sa ubang mga nasod. But in this case gyud, no, ang nahitabuan ni it looks like, no, that we were not really the first inhabitants in the islands, no, in the Philippines, no, or in Southeast Asia for that matter. It's actually the Aitas or the Negritos. But with the coming of the Austronesians, mo to siya nahitabuan na we were able to push them, no, so that naana sila makit-ihinoon, no, sa katong mga bukid-bukid nga mga parte sa nagkadaiyang nasod, no, sa Southeast Asia.
So, sir, is it makaingon ba ta nga because of that, sir, ang Negros kinakaraanan kaha siya nga let's say settlement?
It's not really clear, no, kay wala pa sa gintay kanang kuan pa definitive, no, nga kanang unsay tawag ani, wa pa gintay definitive nga kanang explanation from archaeology. Perhaps, no, ang mga archaeologists makahatag pa nato og kanang uban, makahatag pa nato, no, og clarification ana in the future, especially if there's going to be kanang mga artifacts that will come up very soon. But it looks like, no, it looks like ang Cebu baya dili baya kay mga Austronesians ra ang nagpuyo, because when the Spaniards came, no, naabiya evidence, no, nga naapoy mga Negritos nga nagpuyo diri sa Cebu, pero gamay ra gid kayo sila, no, kay mas daghan man gyud ang mga Austronesians. In fact, I think during the American era, diha pay gamay nga mga settlements, no, nga makita sa mga bukid-bukid, no. So ingon ani sad na siya ang nahitabo sad sa Negros, no, nga they used to be in the lowlands, unya dayon pag-abot sa mga Austronesians, no, na kuan sila, na display sila niya, montong ni tago na lang sila ngadto sa mga bukid-bukid ni areas. And of course, this is not only in Cebu, no. This is not only in the Philippines, buong sa nahitabo pod sa ubang nasod, no, in maritime Southeast Asia. Like for instance, I think in Indonesia, no, mousad na siya nahitabo nga ang mga Negritos, they were pushed to the mountains. Okay.
Oh, I see. We'll probably learn more about what happened later on as we continue with our discussion. So, let's move on to the next question. Now, sir, with a bustling trade going on, there came warfare, right? And many pre-colonial Filipinos many pre-colonial Filipino states often engage in conflicts for the control of trade routes in the archipelago and beyond. In recent years, scholars have researched that ancient Visayans, particularly probably during the 12th century, conducted maritime raids in southern China. What was the nature of naval warfare during the pre-colonial period? Were sea raids by the Visayans common at that time?
Okay, that's a good question also. So, if we are also going to look at history, uh, it would tell us no nga ang sea raids no ang kaning raiding was actually a practice in the entire Visayas. If not in the entire Visayas, it's in the entire Philippines. Um, we hear from kanang early Spanish missionaries no nga moingon sila nga ang kaning lugar kay mo raid sila ani nga lugar niya katusad nga lugar kay mo balik sad sila grade aning lugar no. This actually happened in Bantayan no. I think it's documented by Scott no. I don't know kung kinsa lang to kinsay kanang source ni Scott, but I think it's Elsina. Ni-mention man si Scott nga ang Bantayan ko no, Bantayan Cebu no, kanang mag-raid di ay kuno ang mga tao sa Bantayan sa Samar no, or kauban sa mga tao sa Samar mo raid pod ang mga taga-Bantayan sa Mindanao mo rin inana ba. So ang practice gina siya sa mga early Visayans nga kanang sa makauna lang ba mag-raid sila sa mga communities. Of course, from our point of view today no, that is not moral no, but sa unang panahon wala man sila konsepto nga ingon anak no. It was their way of life no nga mang-raid sila sa mga different communities. Ang nakapait ng anak niya is that when we became Christians no, pagkahimo na tong mga Kristiyano, we stopped trading no. In fact, if we are going to read kanang mga Spanish sources, moingon kuno ang uban kuno nga mga communities adto nga tungod kuno kay nahimo silang Kristiyano no, dili na kuno sila makabaws no sa uban nga mga tao nga ni raid nila. Now, let's now go back to the question. The question is, it seems to me kung nangutana si Miss Isa whether na tinuod ba gid na nga naabot ang mga Visayans no og raid sa China. Yes, that is documented no. That was documented not less than no by Chow Yukwa no or Chow Jukwa no in the 12th century. Ang ilang gipang raid no sa mga Visayans mao kuno ni ang mga lugar nga naa sa Fukien no in China. Now, gi-analyze ni siya sa mga historians no o sa mga archaeologists kung tinuod ba gyud ni siya nga mga Visayans gidto sila. Kay nga naman ang basis ani nila is ang according to Chow Yukwa, ang mga raiders kuno were known as Pishuye no, Pishuye no, which sounds like Visaya no, Visayans no, Pishuye. Then according to a source that I've read no, iyang gi-analyze na siya no niya, he theorized no nga if indeed no mga taga-Visayas to ang nag-raid sa China during the 12th century, it would not have been the Cebuanos kuno or people from Negros or people from Bohol. If it were possible no, based sad no sa iyang gisulti nga kanang unsa poy giingon pod ni Elsina, it would be no nga ang mga tao kuno sa ibabaw mooy nag-raid sa mga communities in China no. Kinsa man ni sila, these were actually the pintados no of ibabaw kanang Samar og Leyte nga areas no. So nag-unsam na sila ngadto. So basically the source said no nga ang ila kunong raid kuno, ang ilang raiding ang tuyo ato nila was to get iron no. Kay nganong iron man for instance no ang ilag yung tuyo dito, it was actually because iron was used no in warfare niya. It was also used in agriculture no. Kay di ba ang mga farm implements mas ligon man siya kung magamit sila og iron niya. Ang kini kuno mga taga Samar kuno og taga Leyte sa unang panahon, wa man sila available resources no, unlike the people of Cebu for instance no. Kay ang people of Cebu at least no na may mga Chinese no junks that nga moari sa Cebu para para makig-trade, but sa ila wala man kuno kaayoy mo adto. So mao kuno na no nga ni resort kuno ang mga tao sa ibabaw no, the pintados of Samar and Leyte o grade sa parts sa China.
Mao na ilang gingon sir nga pag-abot sa mga katsila nakigbaylo ang mga Cebuanon ug lansang. Does it have to do with that logic nga pag-abot sa mga katsila ang ilang bulawan ila kunong gibaylo og lansang?
Yes, that could be kanang possible because of course gold used to be abundant in Cebu man, di ba? If you're going to read Legazpi, Magellan and and Legazpi's ko and ay kanang chronicles di ay no, you will find out no nga indeed no makaingon ta makakonclude ta nga gold was abundant in the Visayas. Nya wala may iron no nya ang kanang iron kuno kay gikan ra man gid siya sa China. So mo na siya nga ang gold, it was possible nga ilang i-exchange ang ilang gold sa kanang kuan iron no kay mas magamit man ang iron og warfare no, di man ani mo magamit ang gold ang imong bulawan sa imong warfare, di ba? Imagine na, di ba siguro na pwede nimo ipanghimuon og kanang kutsilyo niya ipangdunggab ang imong bulawan no kay kasi babali ra na siya no. So that could be possible no nga inana gyud na no ang ilag yung tuyo adto was to get iron no kay ang iron was used as farm implements man unya and it was also used for kanang for warfare.
But were there like certain tactics that the Chinese described in their accounts nga mga warfare tactics nga nakaingon sila nga these people must have come from the Visayas or from this region?
I think they concluded nga inana siya nga mga Pishoye to sila. It's because ang raiding sa nahitabo sa Pilipinas, particularly in the Visayas, inana mangid siya ang trend niya no, ingon ato man ang pag-atake no sa mga Bisaya no. So motong ni conclude sila nga mga Bisaya agid ni ang nang raid no kay pare-pareha man og unsa may tawag modus man tingali no, modus man siguro in our lingo today no, inana tingali.
I think what Miss Masi wants to know, sir, is there anything specific that really identifies that really identify these people as Visayans? So yeah, like, is there anything specific that the historians have realized regarding their tactics? So maybe a battle cry, or they use a specific type of weapon, or
yes, ang other identification nila was actually because they were sporting tattoos. No, yeah, of course, the Visayans at that time were actually sporting tattoos. No, we were called pintados. No, kay tungod sa atong mga patik sa lawas.
Yes, and speaking of our pre-colonial Visayans, we are now moving on to the Spanish era. So, sir, after the Spanish conquest of the archipelago, our ports opened up for the first time to trading with the Americas, thanks to the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade. What was Cebu's role in this trade route? Did the port of Cebu benefit from the galleon trade? And what role did Cebu play during the naval incursions of the Portuguese, Dutch, and English throughout the colonial era? So let's take these set of questions one by one. So, number one, what was Cebu's role in this trade route?
Okay. Wala kay ni nato nahibaw-in no nga for a time di ay ang Cebu actually ni-appeal siya sa galleon trade no. This was sometime in 1598, 1594 no until 1604 no. In 1568 di ay no, just to give a context kanung naka-appeal ta kaning galleon trade, Guido de la Besares no, I think he was the treasurer at that time no of the kanang colonial government in the Philippines. he actually wrote to the King of Spain, no, to allow the Cebuanos to join the galleon trade. Unya, uh, although delayed siya, no, the reply actually came several years later, no. It was only in 1594 nga ni hatag ang king, ang hari sa Espanya, o go signal nga, o sige kamong mga taga Cebu, pwede mo mo-appeal sa kanang kuan, pwede mo mo-appeal sa galleon trade. But then naato siya kanang conditions, no, ang pag-appeal sa Cebu sa galleon trade. Unsa may mga conditions ato nila? First condition was that kanang dili sila mamaligya, no, og katong mga butang, no, nga gibaligya na sa mga Tagalog. Unsa man ni siya mga gipangbaligya sa mga Tagalog, mo na siya katong mga Chinese ware ba, mga porcelain ware, no, unya mga silk, no, inana, so on and so forth. Karon ang ilang condition was kung mo-appeal mo kamong taga Cebu, dili mo mamaligya og ingon ani. Unya another condition was kung mo-appeal sad mo, kinahanglan nga kamoy magtukod sa inyong galyon, no, nya kamo say mo equip sa inyong galyon. So all these conditions, no, were complied with by the Cebuanos, so that Cebu indeed was able to dispatch a galleon, no, in 1595 to Acapulco, no. But there were also several attempts, no, pagkahuman adto, no, nga kanang magpadala og balik ang mga Cebuano og galleon paingon sa Acapulco. But then it often turned into a failure, no. Wala sila ni succeed kay nga naman either ang galleon kay nibalik sa agi or ang galleon kay kanang nakasugat og kanang bagyo nya nalunod, murag inana ba. Now we might ask, unsa may mga produkto pod nga gipangbaligya sa mga Cebuano, gipangdala sa galleon paingon sa Acapulco? Basically these were kanang cash crops ra, no, ang ilang gipadala, no. Okay, of course di man sila pwede magpadala og porcelain ware o katong mga silk, no. Unsa man ni sila? Basically moauto silang katong cinnamon, no, nya dayon you also have lompotes, no. Ang kaning lompotes kay these are kanang cotton cloth ni siya. Unya besides ana niya, there was still another nga kanang product, no, cocoa de no, cacao ba, cacao. Nagpadala sad kunuta og cacao paingon sa Acapulco, no. Mao ni siya ang mga products nato nga gipadala. Now towards the end of the brief kanang brief nga pag-appeal sa Cebu sa galleon trade, kanang naa sila yung mga problema ato such that appeal sa ilang mga gipangpadala sa Acapulco mao ang saging, no, og mga prutas. Then of course we know nga these are perishable items, no, but I think ilan na lang tong gi-insert ngadto, no, ang kaning saging og katong mga prutas. It's actually because wala na gid sila laing mapadala paingon sa Acapulco, no. So to cut a long story short, no, I think ang last nato nga gipadala nga galleon, no, or last attempt nato nga magpadala ta galleon to Acapulco in Mexico was in 1604, no nya. But then that failed, no. In 1611 kuno we tried once again to send another galleon, but then niingon na gyud ang King of Spain nga no, you cannot send a galleon anymore, no. So from then on, no, diha na hunong na ang atong participation sa galleon trade, no, sa paingon sa Mexico.
I see, sir. So the port of Cebu benefited from it for a while, but in the long run, it was not feasible for them because of the limited trading options during the route given to them.
I don't think they even benefited from it, no, because I think they incurred economic losses yun, no. Wa gid sila nakaginansya adto. Kay can you imagine if you are going to build a galleon, no? It must have taken them a quite handsome kanang sum of money, no. Unya dayon mora to ilang gipadala paingon sa Mexico. Suppose nato na nga nahalin to sila, makabawi ka sila sa ilang investment. Well, I doubt, no, kung nakabawi gid sila.
Sir, kanang how did they... Ay, sorry.
It's all right. It's all right, miss. You can go ahead.
O nakuan lang ko na na-invest na kog maayo sa discussion ni sir. But how did they determine their kanang economic unsay nga ana kanang development at that time sir nga makaingon sila nga we had a good economy or bad ba atong economy? Unsa may ilahang mga determiners ato nga maayo ang dagan sa negosyo?
Actually, ang ila ra gyud nang gipeg no sa unsay ma-export sa Pilipinas paingon sa Mexico, no? Kung dako og unsay tawag ani, mahalin no ang gipadala nato sa Mexico, no? I think mo na ang ilang measurement nga inana ang inana ka successful ang atong ekonomiya. Kay of course no, limited man kaayo ang atong trading at that time no. It was actually just between the Philippines and Mexico, although nag-angkat ta gikan sa China og mga butang nga moopoy atong gibaligya ngadto sa Mexico, no. So inana ra gyud siya. It was really very limited. I think it was only in the 17th century man siguro 18th century na finally no we were actually exporting to other parts of Europe, no. Limited lang hinuon siya, no. Limited lang siya. It will only be later on no in 1830s that the Philippines would be open to world trade, no. So diha na gid to no nga nahimo na yung brisk no ang kanang trading in the Philippines when the Philippines was opened to world trade no in 1830. That started with the port of Manila. Yeah, later on, ang port of Cebu na dayon ang mo'y na open.
All right, sir. So, a follow up question. Moving back a little to the colonial era, what role did Cebu play during the naval incursions of the Portuguese, Dutch, and English throughout the colonial era?
Okay, wala man kay tay participation adto no kay murag dili man we were an economic backwater man ang Cebu, no. So basically ang katong mga Portuguese, katong mga Dutch no, they just actually basig nilabay ra sila sa Cebu kay there was not much economic kanang activity in Cebu man pod no niya. So basically ang ilang attention adto didto nila gi focus no sa Manila, which of course no was the capital unya. Ang mga negosyo at that time was actually concentrated in Manila man. So I doubt no if we had a great participation sa katong time sa Dutch ug sa mga Portuguese.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. Miss Masi, would you like to add on?
Yeah, naka-realize lang sad ko ba nga, it must have been really, really a challenging time for them. Kaya katong giingon ni Sir ba nga, kanang alkansita with other islands because there were some products gikan nato nga kanang dili nato pwede ma-barter sa ma-trade sa lain because these were already available in some other kuan no. So murag magahuna-huna sa kabaka kanang ang Cebu at that time, we also received a lot of like porcelain wares but dili sa ta pwede ka trade ana kay nanasad ang taga Manila ana. Rinana bitaw. So I think that's the same economic activity that goes on until today siguro no.
Moving on to the next question. During the 16th to 17th centuries, Cebu was plagued with frequent Moro raids from Mindanao. Apart from impressive coastal defenses, native Cebuano boats often faced off with the Moros. What was the nature of naval activities in Cebu during this period? Did these raids interrupt trade in the port of Cebu?
Okay, another good question. Ang question ana niya is whether ang katong mga Moro raids na interrupt ba ang trading din sa Cebu. Okay, the answer is there was not much trading in Cebu actually at that time. Kay ngano man kay of course Cebu was a backwater man at that time kay ang concentration sa colonial administration was actually Manila. No, so wala gid kayo economic, wala gid na wala gid na unsa ni wala gid maapektuhin no ang ekonomiya sa Cebu at that time, no. Kay katumanggong panahon nang gud, besides nga backwater ang Cebu at that time, wala sad kaayo mga sa Cebu kay tungod sa presence sa mga Moro pirates, no. Kay ang mga in fact no niingon gani there's this kanang letter kuno by the Bishop of Cebu at that time, no. This was in the 1780s. Niingon siya nga in every nook kuno of the islands in the Visayas, there is a Moro pangko hiding kuno niya. Just kanang kuan kuno marabag nangita lang og time ba para mo pounce no on people, no. Kay inato man to siya, so mo to siya nga ni samot og kamingaw ang Cebu, kay instead nga uban nga mga tagalaing probinsya mo ari sa Cebu, no, di na lang sila mo ari sa Cebu kay kuyaw man kay itong mga panahon na, no. Ni ang mga Cebuanos pod at that time wala sad kaayo nagpuyo pod sa mga kanang coastal areas, no. The Cebuanos at that time lived in the mountains, no. Ni-eskapo sila sa mga kabukiran kay ngano man kung naa sila sa kanang plains manggod, dali ra kay sila ma-raid, no. Dali ra kay sila bihagon sa mga kanang mga raiders, no, sa mga pirata. So ang moto ang ilang gihimo nga nanguan na lang sila, nanago na lang sila. Nanago na lang sila sa bukid.
That's quite interesting, sir. So, what are there any specifics that you can tell us regarding the naval activities happening in Cebu? Like, how did they rally against the Moros to defend themselves at this time?
Okay, so that's another good question. So, giunsa man pag-defend sa Cebu, no, sa iyang coasts at that time, the Cebuanos actually used barangayanes, no. Unsa man yung mga barangayanes, these are actually kanang mga boats, no. Basically kaning mga boats, mura ra ni siya kanang mga karakowa ba, no. Ang katong mga pirates, no, mga pirata, nagamit to sila mga karakowa para mo'y gamiton para i-raid ang Cebu, no. Mo to ilang sakyan. Sa side pod sa mga Cebuano, no, nagamit sa og mga gagmay nga version sa karakowa, no, which we called barangayanes. Unya, these barangayanes were actually equipped, no, with kanang mga ammunitions, no, para mooy ipakibatok nila sa mga sa mga pirata. Nya, of course, usa no sa mga tao no nga inila kaayo at that time, no, was actually Father Julian Bermejo, no. Father Julian Bermejo. Of course, kini si Father Julian Bermejo, he was a long time parish priest of kanang Bolhoon, no. Unya, siya ay nag-organize sa mga tao, no, sa southern part of Cebu para makig-away sila sa mga pirata. So, kung makita na nilang magdanga-danga na ang mga pirata sa horizon, iya din to i-dispatch dayon ang mga barangayanes, no. Kay aron samtang naapa sa loud, no, ang mga naapa sa loud ang mga pirata, iya nang gisugat na nila nga ila nang giaway, kay aron ang katong mga pirata eventually would not be able to land, no, sa coasts, no, and then do damage, no, sa mga settlements. Unya og aron dili sila makapamihag og mga tao. No, so sikat ka ito si Father Julian Bermejo at that time. And I think it was not only Julian Bermejo no, because if you go to northern Cebu, no, naapon sila Padre Kapitan, no. I think Miguel de Jesus, no, who was actually a recollect who was based in Danao. Mo say iyang gibuhat pod, no, nga iya sang gipanalitdan pod ang northern coasts, no, from the incursions of the Moros.
Yes, I believe the Kabilin Center also touched on Moro raiding during one of our So Beautiful Town feature videos. So to our listeners out there, you might want to check out that episode because it's very interesting and it tells us a detailed history of of how Cebu defended itself against Moro raids. And sir, moving forward in history, by the 1860s, Cebu, like other ports in the Philippines, were opened to world trade, as you mentioned earlier. How do you compare the port activity in Cebu before and after the port opened? Did the opening of the port to foreign trade since the 16th century contribute to Cebu's rise as an economic center?
Okay, that is another good question. Definitely no, ang Cebu, pag open sa Cebu sa world trade, mas nilambo pag yun ang Cebu. No, kay nga naman daghan naman kaayo ang mga foreign ships no that would go to Cebu, pick up products here, unya dayon ilaning dadon sa various ports no all over the world. Basically sa Europe no o sa United States of America ang ilang gi dadaan ani nga mga produkto. So kaning daghan tungod ana niya mas nilambo gyud ang Cebu niya. Usa sa mga nakabenepisyo day ay sa kanang opening sa Cebu sa world trade mautol sila ang mga Chinese mestizos no. Niya ang kaning mga Chinese mestizos sa parian niadto sila sa kanang mga lain-laing mga lungsod no sa Cebu namalit sila mga kayutaan unya ang kining mga yutaa no mao ni ilang gipangtamnan og mga cash crops no but basically dinhi sa Cebu ang ato yung main cash crop adto at that time in the 1860s no was actually sugarcane no so ilang ning gipangtamnan og mga tubo ang kaning mga yuta no nga ilang gipangpalit ya mo usad ni siya actually no ang reason no nga nganong nahurot no naupaw ang atong mga kagubatan dinhi sa Cebu no ang atong ang atong forest dinhi sa Cebu it's actually because of kining pagpananom og mga katubhan but then ang effect ani niya was nilambo sa ang mga different towns in Cebu no yeah besides that wala lang kay nilambo ang mga nagkalain-laing mga lungsod sa Cebu kung dili ang uban ani mga lungsuran nanganak sa di sila lain pa nga mga lungsod no so mo na siya nga during this period from 1860s to 1890s daghan kaayong mga kalungsuran dinhi sa Cebu nga nitubo no or gipanganak no during this time because it was a time of progress man in Cebu brought about by brisk business no nga gidala sa opening of Cebu to world trade.
Alright, it's good to hear that Cebu eventually became open to world trade and it had a more stable economy thanks to maritime trading and opening up its ports. Miss Masi, would you like to ask a question? Would you like to say contribute to the discussion?
Kanang sir na lang sad ko'y pangutana because mobalik lang ko gamay to the Moro raids no and that one about Father Bermejo. What I'm interested about is kay I often get a lot of questions like if the Moro raids were concentrated sa southern part of Cebu, then nganong mas daghan kuno og mas karaan nga mga unsay nga nana karaan nga simbahan, mga structures nga na preserve dito kaysa kuno sa north. I get that question more often daghan kayo so but for the sake of our viewers basin matubag nimo sir.
Okay, actually no nganong ang mga karaang simbahan naaman siya sa Southern Cebu is actually because ang population area manggod sa Cebu ang daan nga mga population area sa Cebu naaman gud sa southeastern side sa Cebu no although gipang raid ning uban nga mga lugar sa Cebu sa mga Moros pero naamay uban pod nga mga simbahan ato naamay uban pod nga mga lungsod no nga nakaiskapo nga wa sila ma-raid no usa lang sa mga lungsod no nga na raid sa mga Moros no sometime in the 1780s unya ilang gidauban no ilang gisunog mao to siya ang Bulhoon so mo na siya nga ang kanang simbahan sa Bulhoon no that is already a newer structure because the older structure actually was burned down no by the Moros no kay pag-atake nila sa Bulhoon at that time ila man ang gisunog ang lungsod unya ila sa tong gipamihag no ang mga katawhan. Ang kining sa Northern Cebu, wala kay na siya tao no, mao na siya nga ang mga kalungsuran sa Northern Cebu no, kaning northeastern Cebu, mga bag-o kay na sila nga mga lungsod no, except lang sa Bantayan no, kay ang Bantayan pod ah, karaan kay na siya nga lugar no niya, gisbusan na siya paborito nga kanang hunting ground sa mga Moros at that time. Kay ngano man ang Bantayan manggod no, kung nakaadto na mo sa Bantayan, wa gud siya bukid no nya, wa sad siya mga forest pod kung asa manago ang mga tao no nya. So literally mo bitaw na mo ingon sila nga ang mga tao kuno sa Bantayan kuno murag gyud kuno mga isda kuno nga sikupon sa mga Moros no nya. In fact, ang mga Spanish officials no at that time wanted to relocate no the people of Bantayan to other parts of Cebu. But then based on documents, nibalibad ang mga taga-Bantayan kay gusto ra gyud sila nga adto ra gyud sila mapuyo sa Bantayan ya, magpakamatay sila sa Bantayan no. Unsa man ginaa sa Bantayan nga nganong dili man sila mobiya sa Bantayan, mao sa nay pangutana no nga murag di pa kay nato ma-explain, but perhaps lang no, it's actually because there was abundant food in Bantayan at that time. So mao sad na siyang daghan kaayong tao sa Bantayan, mo na siya nga ang unang parokya sa Pilipinas, unang parokya sa Cebu, no, rather, no, was actually established in Bantayan in 1580. No nya, mo na siyang gitawag siya Bantayan, no? Maybe it's not only because of bantayan sa hari, but actually because ang mga tao pod kanunay silang nagbantay para dili sila kanang kuano atakihon sa mga pirata.
Thank you for the clarification, sir. And I believe we can move on to the more modern part of Cebu's history. So this is with regards to the American period in Cebu. So when the Americans took over Cebu in the early 20th century, the city and port of Cebu experienced a period of modernization and economic prosperity. What do you think were the changes in port activity during the American period? Did maritime trade modernize under American rule?
Okay, definitely no, ni-improve gid siya ang maritime trade in Cebu during the American rule. Kaya nga naman, because basically, America was also a maritime power man siya. No niya, dako man kayog interest pud ang mga Amerikano sa Pilipinas, no? Unsa may interest sa mga Amerikano dinhi sa Pilipinas? Ang atong mga natural resources. So, unsaon man nila pagdala ang atong mga natural resources sa Amerika? So, siyempre, pinaagi gina sa mga barko. So, muuto siya nga, gi-improve pagyud nila ang Port of Cebu. But then, we should not also miss the we should not also miss the fact no nga towards the end of the Spanish era, no, there were actually reforms no that were undertaken by the Spanish government no nga ang ilang mga reforms, actually part of that was the improvement of the ports. Kay ngano man nakita naman nila no ang importansya sa mga ports sa Pilipinas no nga makakita gid sila og kwarta no pinaagi sa mga ports sa Pilipinas. So but then the reforms were actually cut short because of the revolution. Pero if we are going to look at documents, naapay mga plano ang mga Spaniards no sa National Archives of the Philippines kung unsaon unta nila pagpalambo no ang Port of Cebu. But syempre wala na nila na implement. It was already the Americans who were able to implement that no basically because America was also a maritime power no nya, dako man kay sila og kanang panginahanglan no sa atong mga resources. So para madala nila ang atong mga natural resources sa Amerika o sa laing pang parte sa kalibutan atong panahon.
Okay. So, Miss Masi, is there anything you would like to say?
Yeah, but yeah, it's true no kanang pag-open sa gyud sa Port of Cebu, nakita sad nato nga daghan kaayo og improvements sad sa isla sa island of Cebu in terms of structure, daghan kaayo Kay makasulod naman ang atong mode of maritime transportation, makasulod na naabot na ang mga maestro diri ang mga Thomasites. No, daghan siya. It's not just the economy that was that developed during that time, but of course, America, for example, was able to bring in their, like what I've said, no, the Thomasites who educated the Cebuanos, and then improve ang atuang civil works because of the many improvements that later on followed after the opening of the port of Cebu.
And if I may add, no, mo bitaw na no nga nagbarog gihapon karon ang kanang mga karaan nga building sa nga gipangtukod sa mga Amerikano, and that had something to do with the improvements of the port during their time. No, I think Masi of course is very familiar with that, no, kay na she is affiliated with the National Museum, and no ang kanang gihimo karon nga National Museum that used to be connected, no, with, of course that was connected with the port of Cebu, kay mao man na siya ang customs house, di ba niya. Ang duol ana niya kay naay kompanya Maritime, no, which actually for a time was the tallest building, no, in Cebu.
Yes, sir, that is true. Moving on to our next question. Is there before we do, is there anything else you would all like to add, or I believe we can move on. All right, so this is our last question for today. Cebu was devastated during the Second World War. Its port and ships were among the casualties of war. After its liberation, the port of Cebu was further developed. Do you think the destruction of the old port of Cebu paved the way for the development of a new international port which we now know today?
Yes. Definitely, no, ang katong panghitabo sa giyera mao gid to siya kanang sort of way, no, nga para matukod ang international port, no. But by the way, before we proceed, no, ang katong port of Cebu at that time, there was a part, no, nga giguba sa mga Spaniards, sa mga Japanese, no, for what purpose? Para i-paralyze nila ang activities sa mga American o sa mga Filipino guerrillas, no, kay para dili maka-act, no, ang mga defenders, no, nga Americans o mga Filipinos. But then naasad sila yung mga gipang-retain adto kay unsaon man nila ilang gubon tanan, unsaon man lang nila pagpadala sa ilang mga soldiers dinhi sa Cebu kung ilang gubon tanan. So anyway, so dako kaayo og dako kaayo og kanang impact, no, ang gera para palambuon pagyud ang port of Cebu, especially nga nakita nila nga dako man gyud kaayo og dako man gyud kaayo og agi, no, sa income ang port of Cebu sa kanang overall kanang economic economic nga kalihukan, no, dinhi sa Cebu. So moto ilang gi-develop kay daghan kayo mga shipping industries baya, no, shipping lines, no, that were based in Cebu. Unya, so basically mao tong ila pag yung gi-open ila pang yung gi-develop ang Port of Cebu para mahimo siyang international port kay in order to respond to the challenges of the time, no, kay nagkadaghan naman pod ang mga pasahero, nagkadaghan sad ang mga barko na moari sa Cebu para magdala og pasahero niya, nagkadaghan sad ang mga barko nga nagdala og mga produkto gikan sa lain-laing lugar sa Pilipinas, no, paingon sa Cebu niya. Some of those, no, gihimo ra nila ang Cebu as transshipment point, no, para dadon ang mga produkto ngadto sa balik sa uban nga mga uban pod nga mga probinsya sa Visayas ug Mindanao. So angay ra gyud, no, nga ila sa tong gibuhat because of, actually of the need, no, of the times.
Okay, that is very true, sir. Miss Masi, what are your final thoughts regarding this episode?
Actually, nalingaw ko og paminaw ni Sir Trizer because I must say that I still have a lot to learn about the maritime history of Cebu, especially that I've been participating in several archaeological excavations, and um, there are a lot of questions in our excavations that involve a lot of answers from the maritime history of Cebu. And mauna siya nga and it traces a lot of kuan sad answers, not just to archaeology but how we are today as people, as a nation. So kanang daghan daghan pag yun ko kinahanglan makatunan, and it's just unfortunate that it's we only have a little time, no, and siguro if there were a lot of reactors aside from me, daghan-daghan pag yun unta tag mahisgutan. And especially that I am now with the National Museum. We're also gathering a lot of information about the aduana as part of our conservation management plan. So yeah, daghan kaayong salamat for letting me join this podcast.
It was our pleasure to have you, Miss Massey, and perhaps you can coordinate with Sir Trizer at some point in the future so that we can put all of these thoughts into writing and have them displayed at the museums here in Cebu. I believe that's a great idea to encourage more learnings about Cebu's maritime history. Now, Sir Trizer, before we move on to the final conclusion, I would like to hear your final thoughts on this subject.
Okay, now, is there a future for kanang the maritime industry in Cebu, no, given the fact nga kusog naman kaayo, daghan naman kaayong ganahan mo sakay og kanang kuan eroplano, no? I think kana na lang atong hisgutan, no. I think there is still kanang a very great very big prospect, no, for the maritime industry of Cebu. Kaya nga naman kung atong tan-awon man gud, gamay kay ang atong airport, no. So gamay ra kaayo ma-accommodate diha nga mga eroplano, no? Gamay ra kaayo ma-accommodate diha nga mga flights. So how about those people nga dili sila kana maka-afford mag-eroplano? So basically moari gid gihapon sila sa Cebu nga magbarko, no? Nya daghan ba kaayo mga isla sa Visayas ug sa Mindanao, no, nga connected sa Cebu sa kanang tungod sa barko, no? So naagid gihapon ni ang magpabilin gid gihapon ni ang barko, no, para sa mga passengers. Now para lang na siya sa mga passengers, no, wala pa nato gi-factor in ana niya ang mga produkto nga gikan sa ubang mga probinsya nga dad-on dinhi sa Cebu, no, kay gihimo tag transshipment point, no, aning mga produkto. Kini mga produkto di man ni sila pwede isakay eroplano, no. So basically what I can say is the maritime industry is here to stay, no, even for a longer time. Kaya nga naman, this has been with us, no, since time immemorial baya, no. Unya, I think in the future naara gyud gihapon ni kay ang barko ra man gyud gihapon mo ay pinakabarato, no, nga kanang means of transportation, no, to get people from one point to another.
Very well said, Sir Trizer. So allow me to summarize today's podcast. This is the too long, didn't listen to everything version for our listeners out there. So we were highly influenced by the Austronesians, and their technology gave us the confidence to venture out into the seas and neighboring islands that were previously uninhabited. Sometimes we also displaced Aitas and other native settlers who had settled into the lowlands, forcing them to move up to the mountainous regions of the island. It is highly possible that Visayans raided parts of southern China, identified by their tattoos and fierce raiding strategies. And they were also identified by the Chinese term Pi Shu Ye. And it's believed they did this because we needed iron. Because although the Visayas was abundant with gold, we needed some way to get iron for agricultural and warfare needs. Unfortunately, Cebu didn't prosper as well as it should have during the galleon trade because the products we could offer up for trading weren't that feasible, and there was greater focus in defending ourselves against the Moro raids. But when the Americans came in, trade boomed, so much so that the Japanese attacked the ports to prevent American and Filipino guerrillas from attacking. Now, the destruction of the Cebu ports during the Second World War paved the way for the new international port that we know today. And to quote Sir Trizer, the maritime industry is here to stay because it has been with us since time immemorial. All right. And now I would like to acknowledge and thank our speaker, Sir Trizer Mansueto, for sharing his valuable time and expertise in Cebuano maritime history. And for our reactor, Ms. Masi Bacalso Cabañas, for her time and for sharing her thoughts on this session's topic. For our viewers on YouTube, leave us a like and subscribe on our channel, The Kabilin Center, and share us your thoughts down below in the comment section. For our listeners on Spotify, stay tuned for more sessions wherein we tackle more subjects and topics on Cebuano history and culture. Now, I would like to acknowledge the team behind Saysay Sugbo, the Kabilin Center team. Miss Heidi Palapar, our production manager, and our production assistants, Daniel Alatraca, Sigrid Garcia, and MacGyver Mangkikis. I would also like to acknowledge our editor, Daniel Alatraca. This has been your host, Miss Sisa, wishing everyone a makasaysayanong adlaw. Have a great day.